The first week-ish of NFL free agency is in the books, so how do you grade what the Dolphins have done so far, including losses, which might drop down the grade for at least a couple of you? Grade it for me in the comments, A, B, C, D, or F. Let's talk some rumors out there on Dolphins, specifically, for the most part, free agency related. Pro Football Network arguing the Dolphins should try to add Chase Young in free agency, and I think it's a worth conversation since Young is one of the better free agents left on the board roughly a week in. After being traded from the Commanders to the 49ers, San Francisco said, we don't want him, which was kind of interesting. They quickly pivoted to other free agent options out there, but his production looked a little bit more like the guy we saw in his first year. After injuries had really limited the options available or the results that Young was producing. The sacks had dried up. The TFLs had dried up. He was better this year. I think there are times questions about his run support, if he's going a little bit rogue, trying to get sacks sometimes. And there have been complaints from both coaching staffs about his tendency to go rogue and just try to do what he thinks is best, as opposed to, staying in his gap, being fundamentally sound, etc. Here was the argument from Pro Football Network about why they should add Chase Young. Dolphins remain thin on the defensive line, with newcomer Jonathan Harris and Zach Sear projected to start. Miami needs to get through Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson in the playoffs. That sort of pressure likely won't cut it. So that's true, but then, not trying to be mean to anybody, that's not really an argument to add Chase Young. It's an argument to add another defensive lineman. Which interior defensive lineman? That makes sense. Zach Sealer's there as one player. He's going to start. Take your pick of Benito Jones, Neville Gallimore, Jonathan Harris, Davion Nixon, Isaiah Mack, Deshaun Hand, Brandon Peely. All those guys are they're like your backups. You don't feel great about your starters. But Chase Young is a pass rusher. That is what he does. Now, depending on the health of Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb, maybe you start to have some more interest in adding a player like Chase Young. But I think they filled that backup starter if you need him to pass rusher role with the signing of Shaq Barrett. So I don't know if we're blending the lines too much of just defensive line and grouping Chase Young in there, or we got caught up in the outside linebacker base on the Dolphins. I'm not fully sure. If the cost is right, yeah, I like adding talent. That's always a thing smart teams do in free agency. But I don't think it's a one-to-one fit and shouldn't be the best fit for the Dolphins left unsigned. But I do want to hear from you guys, of course, in the comment section. Would you sign Chase Young? Y for yes, N for no. It is the pinned comment of today's video. So if that ad plays on YouTube, ignore it. Instead, go vote. Let's hit Robbie Chosen, as he could be in line to return to the Miami Dolphins. He visited with the organization on Friday, and it reported on Saturdays when that reporting went down. He could return to Miami after playing a limited role with a hilarious stat line. 4 catches, 126 yards, and a 31.5 average because, one big catch will boost that average and you're not playing all that much. This is not the same player he was in his 1,000-yard campaign a couple of seasons ago with Carolina. He kind of flamed out with the Panthers, didn't do much with Arizona, and was a veteran backup in Miami. The Dolphins, though, could be in the market for another wide receiver. They did bring back Braxton Berrios, Hill, and Waddle. That can be your top 3. Maybe Eric Ezukanma can carve out a larger role in this upcoming season. And then it's just, sometimes, and I'm actually okay with it in general because it does make some sense, sometimes the Dolphins kind of become a parody of themselves with speed. Anthony Schwartz. He's not a good receiver, but he is fast. Matthew Sexton, Braylon Sanders coming off the injury, also kind of rounding out the depth chart that will add some more pieces. So do you want Robbie Chosen back on the Dolphins? S for you want to sign him. P for you'd pass. A couple offensive line names being linked speculatively to the Dolphins organization. Dalton Risner and Cody Whitehair. Dalton Risner coming in from Bleacher Report as a top fit. Cody Whitehair coming in from that same Pro Football Network article that we mentioned. The Dolphins have 3 starting spots set for the offensive line. Teron Armstead, Aaron Brewer, in theory, at center, but he could play guard if he had to. Austin Jackson at right tackle. It is the guards that raise some red flags. Now, maybe Robert Jones could be one of those starters. I'd like to bring some more competition in that's not named Liam Eichenberg, and then it's, Lester Cotton. So let's talk about both these players. Dalton Risner is first up here. Did not allow a sack for Minnesota, was still a little bit higher than you want on the hits and hurries and pressures, and the run blocking grade was not very great. So when Bleacher Report says it's quote-unquote reasonable to think Risner's going to command 3 years, 30, no, it's not. I would be surprised if he even approached, got to the $8 million figure. The reality is Risner was not well regarded this time last year in free agency the way I thought he was going to be. He can clearly still play. He can clearly still start for a team. I am down to add him, but it's not going to be 3 years, 30. Like, that's not, especially not with the initial wave over. I don't know if you'll see more than one or two guys get $10 million in the open market. I don't think it's going to be Dalton Risner either. Cody Whitehair, meanwhile, who does offer some position flex along the interior of that offensive line, was probably even worse. The run blocking was really bad. The sacks and hits and hurries are similar-ish to Dalton Risner. The sacks allowed were a little bit worse. PFF did blame Justin Fields for some of the results, by the way, as well, for holding the ball too long. It's a depth veteran option who I think Risner could start for you. I think Whitehair could be like your 7th or 8th offensive lineman, maybe. So name a free agent who you want to still sign. Doesn't have to be the offensive lineman. It could be anything. So head down to the comment section. Let me know what free agent or free agents, if you're an overachiever, you have interest in adding. Let's talk the latest here on one Tyreek Hill. Police, this is all per the Miami Herald, had been called to Hill's home back in the end of January due to a quote-unquote domestic dispute after Hill's wife's cousin on the phone with her heard Hill screaming at his wife. Here's what the Miami Herald reported on the Tyreek Hill incident. Quote, Kita Vaccaro, which is of course his wife's name, reported that Hill smashed an unlit cigar in her face. The report says the Dolphins player said he flicked the cigar at her, but it denied striking her, according to police. Hill also said he and Vaccaro had been arguing a lot lately because his representatives advised him to have a post-nuptial agreement in place, and she didn't want that. Arguments ensue. Officers didn't notice any visible marks on Vaccaro's face or body, and there were no signs of a struggle in the home. The police report eventually stated this: due to conflicting stories and no evidence that a crime had occurred, no arrest was made. I would also advise read the full article, not just the social media headlines. It is concerning to have another bad headline involving Tyreek Hill. It's one of those where you have to let the courts play it out, but it does raise some red flags of, again, it's like it's a one-off with Tyreek Hill. It's again, another issue he's running into there. It'd be nice to not have these headlines anymore. Get that sorted out. By the way, kind of a weird Miami Herald article of it was basically like Tyreek Hill's turning his life around. We're going to bury the lead about the police incident. It was a little bit surprising on that front. But I did want to make note of it. I doubt anything will come of it from an NFL disciplinary perspective, but is something serious and worth mentioning there. We will have more Dolphins coverage for you right here on the channel. So if you haven't already, hit that sub button and don't miss out. It's youtube.com/DolphinsNews.